morning and welcome to News 12 Forum. I'm your host, Jeremy Thomas. February is Black History Month, so for this episode of News 12 Forum, we take a look at various events and topics of Black history right here in Texoma. From the impacts of the Sherman riot of 1930, the history of an all-black theater in Ardmore, the legacy of all-black schools in the area, and how one of the all-black townships founded in the 1800s still exists today in Texoma. And that's where we begin in Carter County and Tatum's, Oklahoma. Nestled in the winding hills of northern Carter County resides the town of Tatum's, Oklahoma. Population 151 residents, according to the 2010 census.
I was 4 years old when it was organized. There was a lot of people, a lot of blacks here.
Tatum's is one of 13 remaining all-black townships still standing today. Researchers with the Coltrane Group, a nonprofit founded by Andre and Jesselyn Head, established to help preserving and revitalizing the remaining historical black towns in Oklahoma, say there were once between 50 and 80 all-black townships in the Sooner State.
And that was still more black towns than in any other state in the Union.
In an interview with KXII in 1996, Ogelia Hogan recalled her memories about her family's move to Tatum's in the early 1900s.
They thought they could live better and not be segregated.
Researchers say when the 5 civilized tribes were forced out of their homes and land with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, many brought their slaves and some black freedmen with them.
Many of the towns were settled via movement of the Trail of Tears, and there were many of those blacks that came later because of the attraction of great land spaces or other advertisements that went out across the country via the black newspapers and circulars and those kinds of things that were passed on by other blacks, but contributed to the early contributions of their towns.
In August 1950, Jewel Carter Varner, a native of Tatum's, completed an extensive thesis on the history of the Tatum's community, including an in-person interview with Mary Tatum, one of the founders of Tatum's, who died in 1963. In the thesis, Miss Tatum stated that her husband, Lee Tatum, traveled in a covered wagon drawn by a team of ponies and stopped overnight at Wild Horse Creek. Doctoral candidate at Regent University, Myrna Roberts says this is where Tatum's began.
Actually, Wild Horse Creek is the front door of Tatum and not the back door, because it's because of the creek that Tatum is here.
After they settled in the area, Lee and Mary applied for a post office designation in 1895, and after the federal government investigated, they approved. And the town of Tatum's was incorporated in 1896 in Indian Territory.
Well, they were diligent, they were resilient, they were primarily self-sufficient within themselves, but very industrious as a people. And that sense of we will do this on our own really kind of distinguished themselves.
According to the Varner thesis, after news circulated about the establishment of the post office, citizens established a church which also served as a school. Varner wrote that from 1895 until 1927, farming was a chief support for Tatum's residents. In 1907, when Oklahoma was admitted to the Union as a state, all adult freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes could claim land.
My dad was a farmer. Farming, plowing mules, big cotton.
You know, this town ended up, even though they didn't have a lot going on with the railroad, they were still able to bring in and start churches and schools. They had a hotel there. They had a blacksmith place, a cotton gin, sawmill. They had a garage, for motor vehicles.
Tatum's quickly became an economic center for southern Oklahoma. In the 1920s, oil wells were drilled, bringing wealth to several farmers and landowners in town. So much so, Richard Norman's last silent film, Black Gold, was filmed in town and featured then Marshall L.B. Tatum's in the cast.
With an all-colored cast, one of the true stories of living colored example featuring Lawrence Kreiner, Catherine Boyd, and these are the big league people like Douglas Fairbanks or whatever. These are the African-American stars. Steve Reynolds Pegg, United States Marshal L.B. Tatum's, and the entire all-colored city of Tatum's, Oklahoma, in a stirring epic of the oil fields. So that was 1928. It was a silent movie, and it was one of the last silent movies made.
According to the Oklahoma Historical Society, the Julius Rosenwald Fund helped build a brick school in 1925, and the Works Project Administration built another in 1936.
A bunch of people came out of this school.
Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, which is listed in the National Registry of Historical Places, was completed in 1919. But the Depression hit this town especially hard, and it still feels the effects today.
The thing was going down right then. Anyway, when I was coming up, some buildings had been that way before I was born.
It happened, a whole lot haven't changed. Most all the older people are gone, so it's a little different.
The town's school has been closed for decades. Kids now go to school in nearby Fox, and most residents work outside of town.
And so as your families move away, you can imagine how that impacts, particularly if it's a town of, 200, 300 people or 60 people, how that impacts the town.
While Tatum's has declined, it has still left an impact on many, including Dr. Elbert Jones, who was born in Tatum's in 1940 and described his experience in a 1999 interview with the Oklahoma Historical Society.
I had some very good years there. I think that Tatum was the foundation for me. I mentioned that when I left there, I didn't hardly remember being 3 years old, but going back, I met a lot of people who knew me and who knew my parents, and then I learned a lot about my family tree and the history of my family from the people who were there. They became educators to me about my history because I didn't remember that much.
Ms. Hogan says the desire and historical contributions of town founders cannot be forgotten.
Organizing a town and giving it the best they had. Although most of them were unlearned, they still wanted to have a better life for themselves and their children.
Welcome back. Heading into the 1930s, Sherman was on the up and up, called the Athens of Texas, known for its 3 colleges, commerce, vast rail system, and sophistication. Sherman's black community was strong as well. Streets were lined with black businesses thriving and led by a groundbreaking group of black professionals. But the course of the town's future and its residents were altered dramatically on one traumatic day in May 1930. Many items from this next story came from KXII's 1997 series on the Sherman riot of 1930 called Flames of Fury. A warning, some of the following images you are about to see are graphic. There have been 4 Grayson County courthouses in the county's 173-year existence. The current courthouse was built in 1936, though, because of what happened 6 years prior.
Where the white woman lived.
On Saturday, May 3rd, 1930, George Hughes, a black farmer from Honeygrove, allegedly raped the wife of his white employer at her home southeast of Sherman. In 1997, KXII interviewed Jack DeWitt, who was a teenager in 1930.
The sheriff is the one that put him under arrest, took him back to Sherman, And then that's when the mob formed.
Hughes was indicted the following Monday with the trial date set for that Friday. Word had quickly spread. Officials called in members of the Texas Rangers, led by Captain Frank Hamer, who would later go on to set the fatal ambush for Bonnie and Clyde.
On the 9th day of May, it all erupted.
That's when the trial began at the courthouse.
There was a crowd of people, of which we all call today mob type crowd of people there mingling all around, mumbling.
Newspaper accounts wrote that Hughes was let in, a jury seated, and he pleaded guilty. According to reports, the alleged victim was carried into the courtroom and screamed when she saw Hughes. A group of men made a push to get inside, disrupting proceedings. Tear gas was used to clear the building. Authorities left, and reports say, for his protection, Hughes was locked into a 2-story steel vault in the courthouse. Teens poured gasoline into the bottom floor of the courthouse and the flames spread to the roof. According to reports, Rangers attempted to rescue Hughes in the vault but were cut off by the flames. Clyde Hall, then 7 years old, says he was walking home with his father past the courthouse.
The fire was in view, the smoke was billowing, and we watched them hook up the hoses, and then we watched men come along with very, very large knives, which I would now call a machete, and they simply hacked the hoses, cut them in two, and there was no way to get water from this particular point over to the courthouse.
I remember this fellow climbed the ladder, and he had put some goggles on and fired up a torch, I guess it was a settler, and he started, around, kind of went around in a circle.
With the dynamite, the mob was able to breach the vault's walls. Most accounts agree that Hughes was already dead.
Then they went up there and managed to get in and pull Hughes' body out. And I can remember pitching him down. I couldn't see him after he hit the ground. There's too many people crowded around.
The mob then dragged Hughes' body behind a car and drove over to the black business section on East Mulberry Street. They hung Hughes' lifeless body on a tree, looted many black-owned businesses, and used store furnishings to fuel a fire underneath the corpse.
My mother was very emotional, and she was crying, and she said, "Oh my God, what have we done to make them hate us so much?"
People were running and going in the direction of the 75 highway north, which was a block from me, just going up the street, walking in droves. And they were saying, all the Negroes get out of town.
Texas Governor Dan Moody declared martial law in Sherman for 2 weeks. The violence subsided. Reports indicate nearly 70 people were arrested and 14 were charged. A year later, 1 man was convicted on 1 count. All charges against the other men were dropped. What happened that 9th day in May of 1930 impacted Sherman, especially its black community.
A lot of people don't realize how far blacks had progressed by 1930 and how the lynchings and the killings and the mobs during that 1930 period destroyed a lot of that.
Professor Jokey McElroy's grandparents lived in Sherman at 1012 Natchez, which is also the title of her memoir. It's an area no longer in existence because of Highway 75. She says before the riot, Sherman was prosperous for blacks with black dentists and doctors.
There was a pharmacist, and my mother, when she was a teenager, they used to go to the pharmacist for malts and shakes, and it was a gathering place for social life for them. There was a theater, they had their own theater. They had all the things they needed to be self-reliant. because of segregation, and all that was destroyed.
McElroy says many black citizens left the night of the riot. Many black professionals with their businesses in ruin eventually packed up and went elsewhere, including attorney William J. Durham, who went on to be a well-known civil rights lawyer in successful cases like Sweat versus Painter, resulting in the integration of the University of Texas Law School and various other civil rights rulings.
It was later when, as an adult, that I learned more about the after effects of how people dealt with that.
McElroy says blacks who remained in Sherman, like her grandparents, got through that time with prayers, hymns, and songs.
I think there's sometimes situations that are so painful that people don't want to talk about it. And I remember as I grew up in Sherman, I never remember hearing them discuss the lynching. I just think it was just too painful for them. They wanted to just erase that horrific and what they had lost. But I know the pain never left.
Welcome back. During segregation, blacks in many communities were barred from white-only businesses, other places of dwellings, and even theaters. So to enjoy entertainment, blacks in Ardmore built their own.
We'll have to go back to the 30s when Ardmore itself had more black businesses on Main Street, because you had a black business nearly on every corner on Main Street. This building itself was the black theater.
Take a trip down Main Street in Ardmore, and you'll experience history. You may pass 536 East Main and see Greater Love Victory Temple Church, but there's more there than meets the eye.
Where the church is now, it was called the Cozy Den. On one side, on the left side of the church, as you go into was the confectionery stand.
Built in 1922, Ardmore was the home to one of the first all-black theaters. Completed during the time of segregation, it was housed in the black business and residential district, an area that had more than 2,000 African Americans.
It was one of the main things on Main Street, and one of the nicest things we had, because that theater, it was a theater.
Charles H. Cox, Jr. is 93 years old. He remembers his family helped run a business inside the theater called the Cozy Den.
When the theater wasn't in use, well, people came and bought from us. If they didn't have anything in the theater, then our place was open, and we stayed open kind of around the clock up until late 12, 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Cox says they had anything from snuff and cigarettes to cold cola and pop and all kinds of food from hamburgers and fish.
You could smell this stuff all outdoors. So we had a variety for as long as it was. It would kind of take care of the immediate needs of the people on this side of town. Because, as I said, you could take a quarter and have a whole meal. And that's about as good as you could do in those days.
The building functioned as a theater until 1944, when it was sold to the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church. Then decades later, the Greater Love Temple Church bought the building, where Lee White is the current pastor.
I think it gives the people a positive hope about the community, that yet there's some positive things going on in the community. The church is here, but not just here per se as a building, but there's active ministry going on.
The building is listed on the National Register of Historical Places, and Mr. Cox will tell you it continues to serve a greater purpose.
But it was nice to have that place to come to. And along with that, we had other business up the street, which right down the street was a funeral home, and then we had a barbecue place up the street. So we had a lot of black businesses in this area.
Well, dozens of blacks served various communities across the country. Sherman had Fred Douglass High School, Denison had Langston, Anderson, and then Terrell High School, and Ardmore had Douglass. Hundreds of scholars and state champion athletes from 1919 to 1969 graduated from Ardmore Douglass High School. I had a roundtable discussion with alumni from Ardmore Dunmar Elementary and Ardmore Douglass High School, and those who were in the last class at Douglass before integrating to Ardmore High, as they talk about their memories and their role of black schools that played in the community.
You think in 1919, you just had 2 graduates. And then we end up in the class of 1964, had the most graduates to graduate from Ardmore Douglass.
Before I could come to Douglass, they had no room and Dunbar, so they had, and Douglas had no room, so they sent us to First Baptist Church, where we had Dr. Smith's wife, and Gloria Ainsworth was our teacher. Then when we got here, I couldn't play football. I wasn't good enough, you know. I wanted to be track, but we didn't have track at Douglas, so I got in the band. And we had W.W. Duncan from Dallas who came in and taught us all these fancy drills. People came from our band was about 32 pieces, about 12 majorettes, and they could strut and they were good. I was drum major, and Peter Green and his brother, I believe, was drum major, and Elmer Jones. And we put on quite a show. And you could hear us at least 3 blocks, and we finally got a glockenspiel, which you could hear 2 blocks. You hear the Ardmore band come down, you could dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, but you could hear us. And people came, like between Oklahoma City, as big as their band was, when they came down, they wanted to see what Ardmore was going to do. Our couples were purple and white, and we put it on. We were very proud of it. We were proud of our school.
I remember being in class when President Kennedy was assassinated. And the calm that went over the school, you know, it was like everybody was in a... yes, we couldn't imagine something like that happening. And to us, you know, for the teachers to have us quiet and in the classroom and nobody talking and nobody moving, and you know, the number of students in the class that cried that day, it was just really something that you just never did forget.
A lot of our teachers were church members.
There you go.
That's true.
And so I think that had a lot to do with how they treated us, because we were family.
That's right. Everything I learned at Dunbar and Douglas, I used up until I retired in 2015. I took typing 1 and 2 right down the hallway there. I was able to use typing and got on the computers. It was a good transition to a computer because I had typing 1 and 2. And I operated on a computer, I know, at least 8 years before I retired. It was so easy because of what I learned here.
Every 2 years we have a reunion. We have our elementary reunion this year. And it used to be like 300 or more people, wouldn't it, Charlie, when it first started out our reunion?
More than that, register, and about 400 or 500 just run around there enjoying it.
So now we're at this point now where we're running at the 200 mark easily, and well, probably 200 might register, but you got 100, 300 running around trying to still be a part of it. And we want this legacy to hold on with Douglas. That's what we're trying to teach our kids. Douglas have a lot of history. Now, our Alumni Association has purchased the Dunbar building. So we're in the process, and this is our secretary of our Dunbar Heritage. We're in the process of renovating, trying to do renovation there. So we want the kids to know what Douglas meant to us and what Dunbar meant to us. The people that came out of Douglas and Dunbar came out real good, prominent people.
I have 3 kids, and they're all grown now, but they get just as excited as I do when we're having our reunions because they've listened to us talk about it. And I wanted to instill that in them because they needed to know where I came from and what struggles or whatever it is I had as going to school at Douglas and living in Ardmore. So they're excited about it too. They want to come. They come and join. They come and have a good time with us. So it is good to let your kids know and talk to them about your life in your life when you went to school at Douglas High School. And right now, the best place to be when we were growing up was Douglas High School.
Well, a special thank you to all of those who contributed to this report as indicated in those stories. And thank you so much for joining us for News 12 Forum this morning.